Did Jared Kushner fulfill biblical prophecy? Let's examine the complete timeline of a covenant with many nations. Roughly 2,500 years ago, the Hebrew prophet Daniel had a vision. It was a profound vision concerning the end times, specifically about a covenant that would be established. Then, in September 2020, something remarkable unfolded. In the White House Rose Garden for nations Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and the United States signed a landmark peace agreement known as the Abraham Accords. The person standing behind it all, orchestrating every intricate detail, was a man with absolutely no prior experience in diplomacy, no background in politics, and no military training whatsoever. His name was Jared Kushner, a real estate investor, the son-in-law of then-President Donald Trump, and quite possibly the architect of what could be the most significant prophetic event in modern history. Now, 5 years later, in October 2025, that same individual has returned, not to mediate peace between two nations, but among 20. You'll be absolutely astounded when you uncover these 8 revelations about this timeline. Revelation number 1. Who exactly is Jared Kushner? In January 2017, Donald Trump was inaugurated as the 45th President of the United States. One of his initial actions was to appoint his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as a senior advisor to the president. This immediately raised eyebrows because Kushner possessed absolutely no experience in government, no background in foreign policy, and zero experience in diplomacy. His professional background was in real estate, focusing specifically on luxury properties in Manhattan. However, Trump had a distinct vision. He declared, Jared is going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's going to bring peace to the Middle East. People laughed. They scoffed. They said, that's utterly impossible. Presidents have been trying for decades and have consistently failed. What makes you think a real estate guy can accomplish it? But Trump recognized something in Kushner, a natural deal-making instinct, a willingness to think outside the conventional box, and, most importantly, access. While Kushner lacked political experience, he possessed something arguably more valuable in the Middle East: established relationships. In May 2017, just a few months after Trump assumed office, Kushner journeyed to Saudi Arabia. He met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, often referred to as MBS. They immediately connected. They were of similar ages, possessed similar worldviews, and were both considered modernizers and pragmatists. MBS conveyed something critical to Kushner. He said, forget about the Palestinians for the time being. They aren't prepared to negotiate. Focus on normalizing relations between Israel and the Arab world. That conversation dramatically altered everything. Traditionally, the established approach to Middle East peace had always been land for peace. Israel would concede territory, the Palestinians would receive a state, and then Arab nations would normalize relations. But Kushner essentially flipped that paradigm on its head. He proposed, what if we prioritize normalization? What if we could persuade Arab states to recognize Israel, establish economic ties, build trust, and then address the Palestinian issue? It was a radical idea. It was unconventional, and ultimately, it proved effective. In June 2019, Kushner hosted a conference in Bahrain known as Peace to Prosperity. He unveiled a $50 billion economic plan for the region. The plan outlined projects for jobs, infrastructure, and investment. The Palestinians chose to boycott the conference. They claimed, you're attempting to buy us off. You're ignoring our legitimate political demands. However, several Arab nations attended. They listened intently. They engaged in discussions. Kushner identified an opening. Then, in January 2020, Trump unveiled what he termed the deal of the century. It was a comprehensive 181-page plan largely authored by Kushner. It offered Israel sovereignty over specific portions of the West Bank. It proposed a limited Palestinian state, but with numerous conditions attached. The Palestinians immediately rejected it, denouncing it as a betrayal, a complete surrender. But here's what's particularly interesting. Several Arab nations quietly voiced their support. Why? Because the plan aligned with their own strategic interests, such as countering Iran, fostering economic connections with Israel, and modernizing their own respective economies. Kushner capitalized on that underlying support. By mid-2020, he was engaged in secret negotiations with the United Arab Emirates. He proposed the UAE become the first Gulf state to normalize relations with Israel, establishing full diplomatic ties, embassies, trade, and tourism. In exchange, Israel would temporarily suspend annexation plans in the West Bank. Then, on August 13, 2020, it finally happened. The Israel-UAE peace agreement was officially announced. Suddenly, the seemingly impossible became a reality. Revelation number 2, the Abraham Accords. On August 13, 2020, the official announcement sent shockwaves around the world. Israel and the United Arab Emirates, two nations that had never formally recognized one another, were establishing full diplomatic relations, including direct flights, embassies, trade agreements, and security cooperation. This groundbreaking agreement was the direct result of the efforts of Jared Kushner. But he wasn't finished there. Within a matter of weeks, Bahrain joined the agreement, followed by Sudan and then Morocco. By the end of 2020, four Arab nations had normalized relations with Israel, all brokered by Kushner in a period of less than 6 months. The agreement was named the Abraham Accords in honor of Abraham, the shared patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. On September 15, 2020, the official signing ceremony took place on the White House lawn. Trump stood proudly at the podium, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu beside him, and leaders from the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain also in attendance. Trump declared, "This is the dawn of a new Middle East." A new Middle East. Keep that phrase in mind, because it carries prophetic significance. Now let's examine what the Abraham Accords actually achieved. First, diplomatic recognition. For the first time since Jordan in 1994, Arab nations were opening embassies within Israel. Second, economic integration. Trade between Israel and the UAE alone skyrocketed to over $10 billion within just 2 years. Third, security cooperation. These nations began sharing vital intelligence, conducting joint military exercises, and coordinating efforts against Iran. Fourth, cultural exchange, including flights, tourism, academic partnerships, and direct people-to-people connections. On paper, it all seemed like genuine peace. But there was a significant problem. The Palestinians were entirely excluded. They condemned the accords as a stab in the back, a betrayal by their fellow Arab nations. Critics cautioned, you can't have lasting peace in the Middle East without meaningfully addressing the Palestinian issue. But Kushner and Trump disagreed. They argued, economic prosperity and regional normalization will create the necessary conditions for a Palestinian deal in the future. For a time, it appeared they might actually be right. But then something occurred that fundamentally changed everything. Revelation number 3, the fall and the war. On January 20th, 2021, Donald Trump left office. Joe Biden was inaugurated as the new president. Suddenly, the momentum behind the Abraham Accords stalled. Biden's administration maintained the existing agreements. They didn't cancel them outright, but they didn't actively expand them either. They deliberately stopped using the phrase Abraham Accords. They shifted their focus back to the Palestinians. They attempted to revive the two-state solution. Kushner, no longer in government, was no longer at the table. He launched a private investment firm called Affinity Partners. In 2022, he secured a substantial $2 billion investment from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. Critics immediately cried foul. They claimed Kushner had brokered deals that directly benefited Saudi Arabia, and now they were essentially paying him back. Kushner insisted it was legitimate business, but the optics were undeniably unfavorable. Meanwhile, within the Middle East, tensions were steadily escalating. Hamas, the militant group controlling Gaza, viewed the Abraham Accords as a significant threat. They felt increasingly isolated. Arab nations were aligning themselves with Israel. No one was prioritizing Palestinian statehood. In their view, violence was the only remaining way to force the world to pay attention. They planned meticulously, they prepared diligently, and they waited for the opportune moment. On October 7, 2023, they launched their attack. At dawn, Hamas initiated a coordinated assault on southern Israel, unleashing thousands of rockets, launching ground infiltrations, and inflicting mass casualties. Approximately 1,200 Israelis were killed, and 250 were taken hostage. It was the deadliest single day for Israel since the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The entire world was shocked. How could this have happened? How could Israel, with one of the most advanced intelligence agencies in the world, not have anticipated this attack? Some attributed it to complacency. Others blamed political dysfunction. Some even blamed the Abraham Accords themselves, claiming they created a false sense of security. Regardless of the underlying cause, the result was clear. The Middle East was plunged back into war. Israel launched a massive military campaign in Gaza. Thousands of Palestinians were killed. Infrastructure was decimated. The humanitarian crisis intensified dramatically. For 2 long years, the war dragged on. The Abraham Accords didn't completely collapse, but they were severely tested. Arab nations condemned the violence, but they largely maintained their established ties with Israel. Everyone was asking the same question: could there ever be true, lasting peace? It was at that critical juncture that Jared Kushner made his return. Revelation number 4, The Return of Kushner 2025. Music. In November 2024, Donald Trump won the presidential election once again, returning to the White House for a second term. Immediately, speculation arose. Would Kushner also return? Officially, he remained in the private sector, continuing to manage his investment firm. However, unofficially, he was back in the game. Trump tasked him with something even more ambitious than the Abraham Accords: to end the Gaza war, bring home the hostages, and broker a comprehensive peace plan. Kushner immediately went to work. He was in constant communication with Trump's official Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. He was in Egypt, coordinating efforts with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Slowly but surely, piece by piece, a deal began to materialize. The period between October 8th and 13th, 2025, became the most intensely focused period of diplomatic activity in modern Middle Eastern history. Here's what transpired. On October 8th, after months of intricate negotiations, Hamas signaled that they were willing to agree to a phased ceasefire. The first phase involved the release of 20 living hostages in exchange for an Israeli withdrawal from specific areas and the release of Palestinian prisoners. Then, on October 13th, the big day arrived, a summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. Trump attended. Egyptian President el-Sisi co-hosted. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was also present, as was Qatar's Emir and leaders from over 20 nations. They collectively signed something called the Trump Declaration for Enduring Peace and Prosperity. This was not merely an agreement between Israel and Hamas. It was a broader regional agreement encompassing economic zones, international oversight, and reconstruction funding from Arab nations. After the ceremony concluded, Trump stepped up to the microphone and announced, "This is a historic dawn of a new Middle East, a permanent ceasefire, hostages coming home, prosperity on the horizon, a new Middle East." There was that significant phrase again. Standing almost unnoticed in the background of the photos was Jared Kushner, without any official title or role. That was the moment when students of biblical prophecy began to take notice. They started posting a particular phrase online in comment sections and prophecy forums. He confirmed a covenant with many. Revelation number 5, Prophetic Claims and Interpretations. So, what are prophecy scholars saying about all of this? Let's start with the mainstream evangelical interpretation, because this is not some fringe phenomenon. We're talking about respected pastors, theologians, and Bible teachers who have dedicated decades to studying end times prophecy. When the Abraham Accords were signed in 2020, they took immediate notice. When Kushner returned in 2025 with an even more comprehensive deal, the conversation exploded. Allow me to walk you through what's being said, what's being debated, and even what's being whispered in prophecy circles right now. The mainstream evangelical view, held by pastors such as John Hagee, Jack Hibbs, Amir Tsarfati, and Jan Markell, has focused on teaching about Daniel 9 verse 27 for many years. These aren't sensationalists. They're serious students of the Bible with massive followings. Millions of people listen to their teachings, and their interpretation of Daniel's prophecy essentially states, at some point in the future, possibly very soon, a charismatic world leader will rise to prominence. He will be intelligent, persuasive, solution-oriented, and he will accomplish something that has eluded every diplomat, every president, and every world organization. He will broker a comprehensive peace deal in the Middle East, not just between two parties, but involving Israel and multiple nations. The Bible refers to this as a covenant with many. When that deal is signed, it will trigger a prophetic countdown of 7 years, the final week of Daniel's 70 weeks. For the first 3.5 years, there will be peace, or at least the appearance of peace. The world will celebrate this leader. But halfway through that period, at the 3.5-year mark, everything will drastically change. He will betray Israel. He will halt temple worship. He will set up what the Bible calls the abomination of desolation, and the Great Tribulation will begin. Most of these teachers are extremely cautious. They don't name specific names. They don't point at particular individuals and say definitively, this is the Antichrist. They avoid doing so because they've witnessed what happens when others have done that: the false alarms, the damaged credibility, the boy who cried wolf effect. But they do offer this advice: watch for the pattern. Watch for the signs. Watch for a covenant with many nations. Watch for someone who appears to solve the unsolvable. When the Abraham Accords were signed in September 2020, many of them suggested this could be it, or it could simply be a preview. Either way, pay very close attention. Amir Sarfati, an Israeli Bible teacher who runs Behold Israel Ministries, wrote, "The Abraham Accords may not be the covenant itself, but they could very well be the foundation for it. Watch closely what happens next." And that's precisely what people did for the next 4 years, from 2020 to 2024. The Accords largely held, trade flourished, embassies opened, and relations were generally normalized. However, to be fair, there were also voices pushing back, and they raised some valid points. Critics, both from within Christianity and outside of it, argued, "You're reading far too much into this. You're forcing modern events to conform to ancient prophecies. You're succumbing to confirmation bias." They pointed to history as evidence. The truth is, virtually every generation of Christians has believed they were living in the end times. In the first century, believers thought Jesus would return within their own lifetimes. Paul even addressed this in his letters. In the year 1000 AD, many people believed the millennium would trigger the end of the world. It didn't. During the Black Plague in the 1300s, Christians were convinced that the tribulation had begun. When Napoleon was conquering Europe, some declared him to be the Antichrist. During the Cold War, many people believed the Soviet Union was Gog and Magog. They were wrong. He lost credibility and significantly damaged the witness of countless Christians. So, when skeptics say, "Here we go again," another false alarm, they aren't necessarily being unreasonable. They're being cautious, and that's a fair warning. However, here's the counterargument. Just because previous generations were wrong doesn't automatically mean that this generation is also wrong. At some point, a generation will inevitably be correct. At some point, the prophecies will indeed be fulfilled. At some point, the covenant will be confirmed. The critical question is that time now? What makes so many prophecy teachers believe that this particular time is different? What distinguishes the Abraham Accords and the 2025 expansion from all the false alarms of the past? Let me offer 5 key reasons. Reason number 1, the specificity. Previous prophetic speculation was often vague and generalized, such as "there's a charismatic leader" or "there's global unrest, therefore it must be the end." But this situation is exceptionally specific. Daniel spoke of a covenant with many, not simply conflict or leadership, but a covenant specifically involving multiple nations. That's precisely what we have: a documented, signed, multinational peace agreement involving Israel. That's not vague. That's demonstrably precise. Reason number 2, the technology. Previous generations simply lacked the necessary technology to fulfill certain prophecies, such as the mark of the beast. How could people be prevented from buying or selling without a specific mark in the days before computers? However, we now have digital currencies, biometric IDs, smartphone payments, and facial recognition. The technological infrastructure for Revelation 13 exists for the first time in history. Reason number 5, Israel is central. Every major end times prophecy revolves around the nation of Israel, and for the majority of Christian history, that was impossible because Israel simply didn't exist as a nation. Now it does. It exists exactly where the Bible said it would be, and it's dealing with precisely the conflicts that the Bible predicted. Therefore, the stage is undeniably set in a way that it has never been before. The prophetic connections are even more profound. Now let's delve into the specific prophecies that are being connected to Kushner's deals, because it's not just Daniel 9 verse 27. There are numerous passages that appear to align. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 3, the peace and safety declaration. Paul wrote, "For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." This isn't merely about peace existing. It's about people actively declaring it, proclaiming it, and celebrating it. What did Trump say on October 13th, 2025? Permanent ceasefire, enduring peace and prosperity, peace, safety, prosperity. Those aren't just generic diplomatic terms. Those are the exact concepts that Paul specifically warned about. Notice what Paul says happens next. Sudden destruction, not gradual decline, not slow collapse, but sudden, like labor pains in a pregnant woman. That imagery is intentional. because Jesus used the same metaphor in Matthew 24 when describing the end times: wars, famines, earthquakes, and deceptions all increasing in frequency and intensity, like contractions. The first contraction is often mild. You barely even notice it, but they gradually get closer together, stronger, and more painful until finally the birth. When Paul says sudden destruction, he's essentially saying that once the peace is declared, the final contractions will begin and build in intensity until the return of Christ. That's precisely why the phrase peace and safety is so significant to those who study prophecy. It's not merely about peace. It's about a false peace that ultimately triggers judgment. Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog and Magog War. This is arguably one of the most detailed prophecies in the entire Bible. Ezekiel describes a future invasion of Israel by a massive coalition of nations. Ezekiel 38 verses 2 to 6 lists the participating nations. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Scholars have traced these ancient names to modern-day nations. Magog, Meshech, and Tubal are generally believed to represent Russia and potentially parts of Turkey. Persia is explicitly Iran. Ethiopia and Libya represent North African nations. And Gomer and Togarmah likely refer to Turkey and Eastern Europe. So, the prophesied coalition consists of Russia leading, Iran participating, Turkey involved, and North African allies. Here's what's truly chilling. Several of these nations were actually part of the 2025 peace deal. Turkish President Erdogan signed a Trump declaration, and representatives from Libya and other North African states were also present. Iran was not at the table, but Trump specifically mentioned them, stating that the door would be open to them if they behaved. Therefore, some members of the prophesied coalition are now within a peace framework with Israel, while others, such as Russia and Iran, remain actively hostile. Here's the key verse. Ezekiel 38 verse 11, And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. The invasion will occur when Israel is dwelling safely, when they are at rest, and when they feel secure. What does this peace deal create? Security, international guarantees, peacekeeping forces, and economic prosperity. Israel will finally be able to breathe, to let down its guard, and that's precisely when Ezekiel says the attack will come. Could this peace deal be setting the stage for the Ezekiel war? Many prophecy teachers strongly believe that it could. Revelation 6, the rider on the white horse. When the first seal is opened in Revelation, John experiences a vision, and I saw, and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. This rider is often interpreted as the Antichrist. Why? Because he's riding a white horse, mimicking Christ, who returns on a white horse in Revelation 19. He has a bow but no arrows, implying that he conquers through diplomacy rather than warfare. He's given a crown, symbolizing authority and power, not through military might but through influence, and he goes forth conquering, not by force, but by negotiation and deal-making. Does that sound familiar? Kushner has no military background. He's never commanded troops, but he's conquered through deals, through negotiations, and through back channels. He's fundamentally changed the Middle East without ever firing a shot. That's the rider on the white horse. Revelation 13, the beast and the false prophet. Revelation describes two distinct beasts. The first is a political leader with global authority, and the second is a religious leader who causes people to worship the first. Here's what Revelation 13 verse 7 says about the first beast, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds, and tongues, and nations. Power over all kindreds, tongues, and nations signifies global authority. Kushner doesn't possess that at present, but the framework that he's building, including multinational agreements, international oversight, and economic dependencies, could easily evolve into that, especially if a crisis occurs, if a war breaks out. If an economic collapse happens, or if people are desperate for solutions, that's when a leader with Kushner's exceptional deal-making ability could readily consolidate power. Daniel 11, the king who does as he pleases. This chapter describes a future ruler. Verse 36 states, "And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done." The king shall do according to his will, meaning there's no accountability, no checks and balances, simply pure, unadulterated authority. Interestingly, Kushner has operated in precisely this manner. I now need to address some of the more controversial theories, because they are definitely out there. If we're going to be honest and thorough, we need to discuss them. However, let me be very clear. What I'm about to discuss are fringe theories. I am not endorsing them in any way. I am simply presenting them so that you are aware of what's being said. The 666 Fifth Avenue theory. Kushner's family owned a building located at 666 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. They purchased it in 2007 for $1.8 billion, which was the highest price ever paid for a single building at that time. Some people have latched onto that specific 666 address, viewing it as prophetically significant. They point to Revelation 13 verse 18, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. The number of the beast. The primary problem with this theory is that addresses are not inherently prophetic. They're arbitrary numbering systems created by city planners. If Kushner had intentionally selected that address as some kind of spiritual statement, that would be one thing, but his family simply bought a building that happened to have that number. It's most likely a mere coincidence. Building entire theories on simple address numbers represents weak exegesis, but it's out there and people are discussing it. So, where does that ultimately leave us? In my opinion, we need to be discerning without becoming sensational. We need to watch closely without obsessing. We need to compare contemporary events to scripture without forcing specific interpretations. The inherent danger of prophecy speculation is twofold. The first danger is crying wolf. If we declare every world leader to be the Antichrist, nobody will believe us when the real one actually arrives. The second danger is missing the signs altogether. If we're so skeptical that we dismiss everything, we could sleepwalk through the fulfillment of actual prophecy. We must walk a tightrope, carefully watching, praying diligently, and discerning wisely. What I can say with absolute confidence is this: whether Jared Kushner is the one or not, he is certainly walking in the footsteps of the one who will be. Whether this is the covenant itself or simply a preview, it's closer than anything we've witnessed in the past 2,000 years. Whether we are currently in the final 7 years or merely approaching them, the stage is undeniably set in ways that it has never been before. The critical question isn't whether Kushner is the Antichrist. The critical question is whether you are truly ready for when the real one comes, because he is coming. The Bible unequivocally promises it, and all the signs strongly suggest that it will be soon. Discovery number 6, the deal's missing pieces. If this is indeed the covenant that Daniel prophesied about, what specifically is missing? Let's run through a detailed checklist. First, a 7-year timeline. The Abraham Accords were originally signed in September 2020. If this is the true starting point, the 7 years would technically conclude in September of 2027. That's really just shy of 2 years from now. But here's where things get complicated. There's no explicitly stated official document saying 7 years. It's not laid out in black and white. That said, peace agreements often involve phased implementations, and the Trump Declaration definitely includes pretty extensive, long-range plans for reconstruction and governance. Could those extended plans stretch across a 7-year period? It's certainly within the realm of possibility. Second point, the temple. Daniel 9 verse 27 mentions the cessation of sacrifices, but of course, there isn't a temple currently standing in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount is under the control of Muslims. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock currently occupied a space where the ancient temple once stood. So, for sacrifices to cease, they would first need to begin, implying that the temple would need to be rebuilt. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. There are various groups actively working towards that very goal in Israel today. The Temple Institute, for instance, has already meticulously created the priestly garments, the altar, the vessels, absolutely everything required for temple worship. All that they are lacking is the permission and access to the Temple Mount. Could this particular peace deal potentially open that door? Only time will truly tell. Third consideration, the abomination of desolation. Jesus directly referenced this event in Matthew 24. He said, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." This signifies the moment when the Antichrist openly reveals himself, desecrates the temple, and demands worship. Has that particular event already occurred? Fourth point, global enforcement. The book of Revelation describes a beast system wielding authority over all nations, a unified, one-world government enforcing complete compliance. Are we seeing that manifest in its entirety right now? Not precisely, no. However, the Trump Declaration does incorporate elements of international oversight, peacekeeping forces drawn from multiple nations, and various economic dependencies. It's not a fully realized beast system, but it could certainly be viewed as a potential framework capable of evolving into just that. Fifth, the mark of the beast. Revelation 13 describes a system in which no one can engage in buying or selling without possessing the mark. Has that been fully implemented yet? No, not yet. But the underlying infrastructure is demonstrably being built. Consider digital currencies, biometric IDs, and facial recognition technology. Could this particular peace deal serve to accelerate the advancement and implementation of those technologies? Absolutely, it's a distinct possibility. So, here's a quick summary of where we stand. We have some of the pieces of the puzzle. Not all of them, certainly, but enough to warrant our serious attention. Discovery number 7. If this is indeed the covenant, what should we expect to happen next? Let's, for the sake of this discussion, proceed under the assumption that this is, in fact, the covenant that Daniel warned us about. What events should we anticipate seeing unfold? First, we should expect a midpoint betrayal. Approximately 3.5 years into the agreement, something significant will break down. Either Israel will be subjected to a large-scale attack, or the Antichrist will reveal his true nature, or temple worship will be forcibly stopped. If the prophetic clock started ticking in September of 2020, we are technically already past that midpoint. So either the timeline is significantly different than we currently understand, or we somehow missed the betrayal, or this simply isn't the covenant in question. Third, we should expect the rise of a singular, influential global leader. The Antichrist won't begin his reign as a clearly defined villain. He will initially present himself as a hero, a skilled peacemaker, someone who can successfully solve seemingly impossible problems. Could Kushner potentially be that figure? Maybe he could, or maybe not. But someone will eventually emerge to fill that role. And when they do rise to prominence, they will inevitably utilize existing structures, such as the Trump Declaration, to consolidate their power and influence. Fourth, we should expect increased persecution of believers. The book of Revelation vividly describes a time when Christians will be actively hunted, martyred, and forced to make a difficult choice between accepting the mark of the beast and remaining true to their faith. We aren't quite there just yet, but the underlying infrastructure is clearly being put into place. Social credit systems, widespread digital surveillance, cancel culture, and pervasive censorship are all laying the necessary groundwork. Fifth, we should expect the Ezekiel War. At some point in the future, the coalition described in Ezekiel 38 will invade Israel. And when will they launch their invasion? When Israel is dwelling securely in their land. This very peace deal is creating just such a condition. So, if the war does come to pass, it will very likely happen suddenly and unexpectedly, catching Israel completely off guard. Now, here's the most important thing to consider. If this truly is the covenant foretold, then the clock is actively ticking. Not ticking towards Armageddon necessarily, and not towards the absolute end of the world, but towards the ultimate return of Jesus Christ. Because the 70th week of Daniel represents the final countdown, the final 7 years, and at the culmination of that period, Jesus will return. So, if we are currently living within that time frame, we aren't watching and waiting for ultimate doom. We are instead watching and waiting for our long-awaited redemption.